Hello, BookTube. It's a beautiful spring day here in Boston, mild and clear, bright and sunny. But a storm is on the way. This weekend, there's going to be a gentle rainstorm that's going to come through Boston, probably on Sunday night into Monday. And that's not going to be much, but it was enough of an impetus to send me to the Brattle Book Shop in downtown Boston, which is a used bookstore I've been going to forever and ever. I love it dearly, especially its outdoor sale lot. There's an enormous lot outside full of sale books, $1, $3, and $5. I shop inside the store as well. I like to chat with the staff, both inside and outside. I like to look around, see what sorts of new things are on the pricing table or being put into the different sections of the bookstore inside. The Brattle's always out buying things, so you never know how the shape of the stock is going to change depending on what kind of a library they just bought. One thing that I want to stress here, I will stress it on other social media as well, and I might stress it again in another video. Recently, the Brattle bought an enormous library of history and biography. Gigantic. And the aspect of that library that is most fully represented now inside the store is the American Revolution. I naively thought they filled an end cap, a floor-to-ceiling end cap, with books from the American Revolution. I naively thought that was all it is. It turns out that's a 50th of what they got. And the rest of it is starting to filter out, and it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. It is the work of a lifetime. The person who assembled this, it was the work of a lifetime to do. It's every monograph, it's every serious study, it's every detailed study, it's every popular study, it's every multi-volume biography, it's every abridgment of every multi-volume biography of anyone connected with the revolution. It's just incredible. Just incredible. And I want to stress, I don't know who's listening to these videos. I will try other social media. I'll also put out some feelers off social media as well to people that I know. But this is not the rump of a good, serviceable American Revolution library. This is a complete American Revolution library. It's unbelievable the amount of care and attention that the original collector of these books put into building this subject out. Military studies, social studies, geographical studies, biographical studies. Everything you could possibly imagine. Every American Revolution book that I know of, with more on the way. So I wanted to put out the call here in the United States, especially on the eastern seacoast. If you are the member of a historical commission, or maybe you have a library, or have access to getting a grant from your town's arts council, or your city, if you're in a sizable city, maybe you have a historical society that has a working library. Maybe your city was important in the American Revolution. It seems a terrible shame to let this collection just fritter away piecemeal and maybe end up in the sale lot. It seems like a terrible shame to do that. This is an impressive library collection on its own. If you are in a position to acquire it, well, I'm sure that the Brattle would make you a very fair offer on just taking a huge amount of those books off their hands. And if you're distant, if you're 400 or 500 miles away, well, you can't just get the whole thing. You can't just say, I want the whole of the American Revolution section, because there are doubles. There are duplicates of almost every book that the owner of these things got. And some are in better shape than others, and also some are more worthwhile than others. I'm sure that the Brattle would be willing, of course they would be willing, to pluck out the duplicates for you, even from a distance. But if you want a more discriminating walkthrough than that, if you want someone to shape those books into a library that you'll spend $1,000 on, I'm happy to offer my services for free. I've read all of these books. I know which ones are worth it, which ones belong in your library and which ones don't, which ones are just make weight. For instance, when we're talking about make weight, there are, I don't even know. I think I saw probably 300 books on George Washington, which is a tiny fraction of the number of books that have been written about him, but still, you never see it. You just never do. Good Lord. I underestimated what this was. Originally I thought it was just the one bookcase display that they put up, but oh my God, it's much, much more than that. It's the opportunity of a lifetime to simply buy at one shot a comprehensive library of books on the American Revolution. So I thought I'd put out the call. I will do that on social media and off social media in some bookish circles that I run in. Just let you know that that's the case. But that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The inside of the store changes all the time. Like, for instance, I could kick myself. Earlier this year, actually, they went on a buy and got a huge number of Bibles. And one of the Bibles that they got was a leather-bound copy of the ESV with all of the annotations, huge amounts of annotations all throughout. A very particular thing, maybe one or two of you might have it. It instead of saying the Bible on the spine, it says ESV in gold letters on a black leather spine. And I remember that was one of those Bibles. I just didn't get it. I thought, it's not for me. I'll let all of these things go. And they did go. But these American Revolution books, they are a little bit more intimidating. Everybody thinks the Bible is not intimidating. But these Revolution books are a little more intimidating. I could easily see a situation in which simple, serendipitous, across the doorway foot traffic to the shop never includes anyone who will make inroads into this collection, much less buy it wholesale, which is what one of you ought to do. Someone ought to make the Brattle an offer on this whole thing. Weed out the duplicates, give me the best conditioned copies of everything. I want one copy of everything, and also, I would be happy to weed out the utterly meretricious junk. The person who assembled this library got everything. If it was anything at all in any way connected with the American Revolution, he got it. And there's a lot of junk there's some, not a lot. There's some junk in this collection as well. I'd be happy to weed that out for you. No charge. But anyway, I did, in fact, go to the Brattle, even though I don't need any more print and paper books, even though the last 10 books I read were on my Kindle. I went anyway. It was so much fun. And I found a bunch of books. Now, I don't know how many of these will stick around. I think a couple of them are obvious keepers, but you never know. The keepers end up in this room. But I can only guess. A lot of them were for curiosity's sake. I have a history with some of them. So let's do we'll do a couple of mass market paperbacks first. I found 2 old Avon mass market paperbacks of the novelist Walker Percy, who I've read all of his books, and I guess I didn't disagree all that much when his debut novel, The Moviegoer, won, what did it win, the National Book Award? Or something like that? It won a major literary award. He got a major literary award, his first novel out the gate. And with a start like that, of course you're going to read. I read everything else that he did. Nothing of it really worked. Even The Moviegoer didn't really work for me. Nothing of it really did. I've had many people put forward theories about that over time. The foremost theory was put forth by a dear friend of mine who's no longer with us, unfortunately, who insisted that the reason I didn't like Walker Percy when the whole rest of the literary establishment did, my God, he got accolades from everywhere with his new novels, every new novel. I had an old friend who steadfastly maintained that the main reason I didn't like him is because he was such a Southern author. But I don't believe that. I don't believe that's true. There are 1 or 2 Southern authors I'm incredibly fond of. It can't just be a categorical thing. But he's one of those authors that's always in the back of my mind with a kind of guilty little itch. Do I want to revisit this person? Is there anything there that I'm actually missing? Every once in a while I will feel that about some kind of author or another. It's usually a mistake. It's usually that itch is just because, I don't know, maybe I'm a little prone to Irish Catholic guilt. Not that the guilt is real. I remember gearing up. I had that guilty itch with a novelist called Feral Sams, and I had that itch, and I geared up, and I launched myself, and I reread everything. Oh my God! The thing I need to remember about that guilty itch is that I'm not just stumbling blind here. I'm the kind of extremely sharp critical attention that I'm paying to everything now, I paid to everything 50 years ago as well. It's not like... Anyway, sensibilities can change, tastes can change. I'd like to think my tastes have changed at least a bit. Maybe they're a little more adventurous, and I probably wouldn't have done anything about Walker Percy, but I got nudged. I found 2 $1 copies of his books. I found The Last Gentleman, which I remember as being genuinely creepy, and this came out in the 70s. Is that right? No, 1966. Good Lord. when our standards of what was genuinely creepy were a whole lot more elastic than they are today. This thing starts off with a guy using, well, you can see it on the cover. He's using a telescope to stare at a woman in Central Park. And he falls in love with her, what she looks like. And she's okay with that instead of calling the police. I just remember this being maudlin and manipulative just from beginning to end. We'll see, though. Maybe I'm wrong. And I also found Love in the Ruins, a weird psychological post-apocalyptic thing that is it the main character on the cover there. It's obviously these are part of the same set. And I looked. I didn't see any other books in this set. I wouldn't have been able, for $1 a piece, I don't think I'd have been able to resist them. Even with an author that I just don't like. We'll see. Maybe I'll change my mind. Then I found a couple of fantasy novels. You've got to have some fantasy novels, right? For my brethren, my brothers and sisters in the BookTube fantasy community, who they don't hate me. They don't like me, but they don't hate me. So I feel that's victory enough. That's Jane Goodall victory enough for 2023. So I found, I have this, but the paperback that I have is in terrible condition. This is in perfect condition. I found a mass market paperback of Wizard's First Rule by Terry Goodkin, gigantic fantasy novel with a cover that I've never really liked. All the washed out colors there. Nothing seems to make any sense. What are these two characters doing? What is this guy doing? Why is this thing acting the way it is? Is it having some sort of nervous spasm? I don't remember liking this all that much, but I found a paperback of it, I think, a year ago, and was always meaning to get to it and just didn't. So I will. And then I found also this is in rough condition. The Wizard's First Rule is in perfect condition. This is like it just came off the assembly line. But this thing is by Michael Sullivan, who's a fantasy novelist I have never, again, this is a thread here, but it's not going to stay true. He's a fantasy author I've never got along with. He always strikes me as just so wordy and boring. I've tried hard with a lot of his stuff, and I know he has fans. And I got book 1 of his Rieria Chronicles, the Rieria Revelations. This is Theft of Swords. And it's grimdark, right? Sometimes you have to steal glory. It's grimdark fantasy, and it's huge. I read this series. I think I have all 3 of these books. It's Theft of Swords, Rise of Empire, and Heir of Novron. And I think I have all of these as ebooks. And I think I read the first book as an ebook. And I contemplated these in the Barnes & Noble bookstore when it still existed in Boston. I actually contemplated them for some eye-watering amount. Yeah, $16 a piece. So I have this. I don't have any of him in paperback and in print and paper book anymore. So now I do. Now I have this. We'll see what comes of it. We'll see. Then this next one may be the find of the day. There's always at any trip to the Brattle, there's always something that you not only didn't expect, but really are glad you saw. And this is something that I have been waiting for, but I didn't know I was waiting for it in this form at all. Years ago, in 2018, there was a big fat biography of Charles de Gaulle by Julian Jackson. And it came out in France, it came out in the UK, it came out in English, then it came out in America. And I read the advanced copy and was blown away by how brilliant it was. Not just how comprehensive it was. It's a big, fat book that covers every detail of de Gaulle's larger-than-life life, but how insightful it was, how wise it is on every page. The biographer is very much present. He's not just dumping his research onto you. I read it and loved it. I sang its praises in a review, I think, for the Christian Science Monitor. And yet I did not keep the book. I didn't keep the advanced copy because it fell apart while I was reading it. And I didn't keep the hardcover that came out, the American hardcover that came out, because it was so boring. It had an out-of-focus black and white photo on the cover, and they changed the name. The American publisher changed the name. I don't guess, I know, because they assume in a very insulting way that American readers are dumb. And that if there's any kind of subtlety involved in the title, well, you should change it. You should change it for the American market. It shouldn't be the madness of King George III. It should be the madness of King George. It shouldn't be Napoleon the Great. It should be Napoleon, a life or a biography. Rather than the original vision. And Julian Jackson originally titled his book A Certain Idea of France. And because that's a famous line from de Gaulle's memoirs. And when it came to America, it was just called de Gaulle. And it was ugly. And so I got rid of the hardcover, even though I filled it with clips from, it got, I wasn't the only person to review this de Gaulle thing. Everybody reviewed it. I got rid of it anyway, specifically thinking, I want the UK hardcover. I want the book that's called A Certain Idea of France. I want the original version. I don't want the dumbed down American. Not the text wasn't changed, but I don't want the dumbed down American title at all. Sooner or later, I will see it. Just like sooner or later, it's turning out to be later. Sooner or later, I will see a hardcover, a UK hardcover or a UK paperback of Napoleon the Great with that title. And today I found A Certain Idea of France, but my God, I had no idea that it was a penguin. I had no idea that this even existed, this edition. There it is. Amazing. Just amazing. That I found, not only did I found the book in the version that I want, but that I found it in a version I didn't know existed. And that cover is not Photoshopped. De Gaulle was huge. He was a tall guy. And this is such a brilliant example of the art of biography. The author has researched everything, knows everything, but has opinions and viewpoints. They're buttressed by the biographical facts, but you very much know you're in the presence of a writer, not just a fact accumulator. This is going to be a joy to reread, especially this. I didn't know this existed at all. Then, speaking of trade paperbacks that are of a particular kind, these Mariner trade paperbacks of this particular author, I just like. They're not very well made, but I like them better than I like any other paperbacks or hardcovers of this author. So I got his best book, his most famous book. The author is Bernard DeVoto, a great American historian who is now largely forgotten, unfortunately, because his books are brilliant and very, very vivid. And I got his book, Across the Wide Missouri, which won the Pulitzer Prize and also won, I think it won the Bancroft Prize. I think the Bancroft Prize originated with this. I think it won the first Bancroft Prize, I'm pretty sure. But it's a brutal book because it's all about fur trappers. And that is a horrible, horrible thing to read about. I don't think it was on Bernard DeVoto's mind that this whole narrative is based on cruelty, but he is so good at drawing portraits of his characters. His only equivalent in American letters in roughly the time period that he was writing would be Samuel Eliot Morison. So I'm hoping that there are these old Mariner paperbacks. See, that's the way they look. For some reason, I just like it. And this was $1. So I grabbed it, and we'll see if there are others. I think they made 2 others, plus the Bernard DeVoto edited version of the Diaries of Lewis and Clark. So 4 of those volumes would be wonderful if I could find them. Then this next one, a keeper. I don't really need to interrogate the future to know that. You've heard me praise on this channel many times the Riverside Shakespeare, the big brown 2nd edition Riverside Shakespeare, the greatest collection volume of Shakespeare that's ever been made. But not the only Riverside volume. There's also a Riverside Milton and a Riverside Chaucer, and they bring the Riverside shtick to those 2 authors. You get sweepingly brilliant introductions, not only a general introduction, but an introduction to each work. You get an enormous fusillade of notes and endnotes and appendices of all kinds. They are amazing. The Riverside editions are amazing. And I have had them both. I've had the Riverside Milton and the Riverside Chaucer. I think I got the latest Riverside Milton from the publisher. But I haven't kept them because they're oversized, extra heavy hardcovers. I kept the Shakespeare. Oh, I have the Shakespeare. I found a Riverside Shakespeare in perfect condition for $1, so I grabbed it. When you see that big brown Riverside Shakespeare, don't just sweep it up. If you see it at a used bookstore, you have to study it because it was used in schools. And I often have to turn down secondhand copies of that particular edition because it's highlighted all throughout. If you find a clean copy, well, then Bob's your uncle, because it's fantastic as a Shakespeare volume. And today I found the Oxford paperback of the Riverside Chaucer, but not the one I'm familiar with. Again, we have a paperback volume, a version I did not know existed. I'm familiar with the 1-volume paperback Riverside Chaucer in a blue Oxford trade paperback that is squat, has the Oxford logo at the bottom, has the pilgrimage to Canterbury on the cover, the famous picture of the pilgrimage to Canterbury. I've had that volume a number of times, and I did not know that there was another one, that there was a different Riverside Chaucer in paperback, and I found it today. Look at that. Look at that. That is not there. Instead of the Pilgrimage to Canterbury, we have Chaucer reading his own work. And this is what I mean. It's just full of notes. Now, this is highlighted, but I went through it, and it looks like the student really only had to read a tiny bit of one tale in the Canterbury Tales. I can live with that, especially since I knew I was never going to see this again. I can live with there's a little bit of obnoxious pink highlighting, but it's not mostly here. And this is an amazing work to have for all of Chaucer, not just the Canterbury Tales. So this will definitely be coming in here. First, I'm going to burrow through it, reread and read a whole bunch of stuff. I think I will start with everything that the Riverside Chaucer has to say about the Book of the Duchess. I think I'll start with that, and then maybe read a few other things as well. Then we have hardcovers to finish up. This first one is a rebuy. It was $1, and it's in perfect condition with a plastic dust jacket. I can't say that about the volume that I already own, so I grabbed it. And I'll get rid of the volume that I already own. I'll put it in a little free library. This is a novel by Mary Renault. This is The Praise Singer. It'll go right up on the shelf with my other Mary Renaults. This is the story of a main character, Simonides, who becomes a bard. He becomes the type of Homeric bard that went from court to court or from palace to palace and took requests, and for money or for gifts or for hospitality would recite huge chunks of the extensive oral works of ancient Greece. And this book is set in a very recognizable historical time period in Athens history, and is right on the cusp of when those works were being written down. Our main character actually is instrumental in getting Homer written down. But it's also an affectionate look at how Renault imagines that world of itinerant bards. It's terrific. All of her novels are terrific. So I got it because the paperback that I had, or the hardcover that I had, was a little bit ratty shape. This is in perfect shape. So now I don't need to think about it again. Then an ex-library copy of Marvin Kittman's great book, George Washington's Expense Account. I found this has a plastic covering on it. It's an ex-library copy, so it's got some of the library stuff on it. But I'll get rid of as much of that as I can. The key is to gently take the plastic cover off, get these stickers off this thing, and then gently put the plastic cover back on. Typically speaking, you will never know. And this author originally had the idea of writing an irreverent book about George Washington, which barely exists. They barely exist. They're not with serious research behind them. Talked it over with a few literary friends of his, one of whom said, it would be great if you wrote an irreverent account of George Washington, and I think you'd find a readership for it. So he did, and it worked. This was a hit. People loved it. And the title comes from the fact that Washington very publicly, very sententiously said that he would not accept a salary while he served the American people. and because he said that of course draws Kittman's attention to his expense account, which turns out to be where he bilked the people. So okay, he wasn't accepting a salary. Instead, he was demanding 10 times as much as his salary would have been in his expense account. That the underlying sort of tongue-in-cheek contention of this book is that habit has never gone away in American life. Whether the public figure is accepting a salary or not, there's always chicanery with the expense account. Of course, in the modern era, we see that magnified 1,000-fold with influence peddling. So, Donald Trump's his diehard cult members, the real dyed-in-the-wool red hats, will often point to the fact with misty tears in their eyes that he sacrificed so much to be our president. And he gave up his salary. He didn't take a salary while he was in the Oval Office. And if you even begin to mention the billions, and I don't mean millions, I mean the billions of dollars that he extorted out of foreign countries and got through influence peddling instead of his $450,000 salary. If you even begin to mention that, those red hats in Terre Haute or Des Moines or whatever will pull out a gun and shoot you dead. So you'll be dead. And they'll be standing there, stunned, as the police pull up. Okay, but he's going to pardon me, right? The police will just shake their heads and say, no, you've seen your family for the last time. You're going to jail for the next 35 years. You're going to die there. Okay. So that happens all the time. That is going to happen a lot more in the future. And that you can't acquaint them with the reality that is very much lampooned in this book, which is that you don't trust a public servant who won't take their money. They're lying to you. This has all sorts of really neat, sharp side observations about Washington and a lot of the people in his orbit. So this is an ex-library copy. I think it was probably doomed to be discarded. If this was in the sale lot for $1, I think if I hadn't grabbed it, I think it would not have lived long. And I need to reread both this and the follow-up, The Making of the President, 1789. I need to read both of them. I'm sure, in fact, I saw that enormous American Revolution collection had 2 copies of The Making of the President, 1789. Those are inside the shop. It had 2 copies of those. 2 copies of everything. Oh my God. Every 1-volume history of the Revolution that you can imagine. Every military history of the Revolution that you can imagine. Every founding father biography. The multiple volume ones. The single volume ones. Oh my God. Just everything. Every study in the world. The Maritime War, the Swamp War, the South War, every battle with its individual books over and over again. Just incredible, an incredible library that's just going a begging. Well, not a begging. I mean, there are price tags on the books, but still, I am certain that the right person is out there who would just want the whole thing. A curated version of the whole thing. That person would not be able to just call up the shop and say, I'll take them all. Instead, that person would either want to ask the Brattle to sort through them or get the Brattle to get me, or ask me directly. I have my emails on every video. I'll sort through them. $1,000, though, would put you well on your way. Oh, my God, what a library that would get you. $2,000, the whole thing. Anyway, this was not there. This was outside in the sale lot. But I didn't do any Revolution shopping of my own in that section. I resisted the temptation. Then this next one is a theme. This was a theme in the last couple of Brattle hauls that I did. I found battle studies of the American Civil War. And I read there was one on Antietam that I got I reread it and it was fantastic. Just fantastic. And I found a couple of others, and I found one today by Peter Cousins, who is so good. Oh my. He is so good when writing military histories of the American Civil War. If you see him, you should definitely get him. I found his book on the Chattanooga campaign, The Shipwreck of Their Hopes. The title referring to the fact that it was during the Chattanooga campaign that the South was broken. Not militarily. The South had already been broken militarily. Anyone who was paying any kind of attention in 1861 or even 1862 would have known beyond a shadow of a doubt that the South could not possibly have won the war except maybe with international intervention. Maybe with the help of Britain or France, but otherwise no. Absolutely not. Otherwise no, there was no way it was going to happen. None whatsoever. It was just a matter of time. That's all. It's just a question of time. In 1861, you could have known that. And in 1861, if you'd been smart, you would have known the nations are not going to interfere because the war is about slavery. Whether Southern partisans wanted to admit that or not, the war is about slavery, and no European country is going to sign up on the side of slavery. So it's not going to happen, which means that your states, without anything in the way of commerce, without anything in the way of industry, without anything in the way of manpower, are eventually just going to get ground to dust. There's just no way that's not going to happen. And it was in the Chattanooga campaign. I think I read this when it first came out in the 90s. Is that right? Or was it the aughts? 1994, yeah. If I remember correctly, Cousins' contention all throughout this book is that it was the Chattanooga campaign that really brought that reality home to the South. That after this, they were fighting just because they couldn't surrender, because they couldn't make themselves surrender, but that they knew their cause was lost and that there was no future victory. No possibility of it. This has a lot of big names in it, a lot of smaller names, because this is so enjoyable to read anyway that it's going to be a joy to reread that volume. And then finally, this is, God almighty, this is from what? 1885. This is the sort of thing that you will find out in the sale lot at the Brattle. You will find books from 1880s, 1860s, 1840s, stuff like that. It's not happenstance. It's not a mistake. The people at the Brattle buying table inside the shop know exactly what will sell and what won't sell in their shop. There's nothing that goes out into the sale lot by mistake. It's just that you want a bargain out there, you can get one sometimes. You want a rarity out there, you can get one sometimes. If the person who's doing the pricing at the pricing table thinks the book will sell in the shop, it won't go to the sale lot. So you can often find older stuff there. I found this old thing in perfect condition, still has the gold gilt on the letters from almost 150 years ago. And it's extremely important for the future. This is Benjamin Jowett, who a lot of you will know as the translator of Aristotle. He was a classicist. And I found his The Politics of Aristotle in an English language translation. So there we've got the beginning of it there. This says volume 1, and when I looked at this, I don't recall that I've ever seen this before. I know the work. I've read Jowett's translation of Aristotle. I saw this out in the sale lot, and I thought, oh, come on. The Politics of Aristotle isn't that long. How could this possibly be volume 1? There's no way. No matter how many annotations you load on it, this is plenty of space for it. And it turns out I was right. This is the translation of the Politics of Aristotle with an introduction and notes. The second volume was essays, which would be a lot of fun on its own. I would definitely got them both if I'd seen it. But this is the one I would have wanted, because this is the actual translation of the work. And the reason this is important is because young Grix and I are, well, I shouldn't say young, he's only 2 years younger than I am, and next year he'll only be 1 year younger than I am. We're going to do a gigantic philosophy event in 2024, and we are starting with Plato, but then we're moving on to Aristotle. And who knows if the Politics will be one of the things we read. We might read a lot of Aristotle. But I wanted to read you the opening paragraph of Jowett's introduction. And you're going to think when I'm reading this that it's my introduction, that I wrote this. But no, this comes from a guy who knew Aristotle better than anybody. The writings of Aristotle are almost entirely wanting in the charm of style, and several of them cannot even be said to have the merit of clearness. In the Politics, we are often unable to follow the drift of the argument. The frequent digressions and conflicting points of view which arise are troublesome and perplexing to us. We do not understand why the writer should again and again have repeated himself, why he should have made promises which he never fulfills, why he should always be referring to what had proceeded and to what follows. He sometimes crosses over from his line of argument to that of his opponent, and then returns again without indicating that he has made a change of font. There are words and clauses which seem to be out of place, or at any rate not to be duly subordinated to the rest of the passage. No other work of genius is so irregular in structure as some of Aristotelian writing, and yet this defect of form has not prevented their exercising the greatest influence on philosophy and literature. The half-understood words of Aristotle have become laws of thought to other ages. I want to point out that if you can coldly assess as a translator, and no one was in a better position to do that than Jowett, that Aristotle is full of sheep tip, and then at the end of that assessment, you pull a dipsy doodle and say he's genius anyway, you're dealing with a lot of pedagogical momentum rather than assessing what's actually on the page. That summary, before we get to that codswallop about genius, that summary is perfectly accurate. Aristotle is really, really bad. Right there on the page, right there in the Greek, he's really, really bad. But it's going to be a lot of fun to experience this with Grix when we do our philosophy of the year, our year's tour of philosophy. Plato, Aristotle, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, St. Anselm, St. Augustine, Boethius. Oh, what fun. But not yet. So that was it. That was my trip to the Brattle today. A pre-storm trip to the Brattle, which I guess makes me fairly predictable. I always go to the Brattle on the eve of some weather event, whether it's a heat wave or a rainstorm or in ages past snowstorms. And I never go on the weekends unless I have a guest in town, which means that this week, if you had guessed that I would go to the Brattle first thing in the morning on a Friday before the weekend storm, you'd have been right. You'd have found me there. And we'd have had fun chatting about books. So we'll just do a Steve period. This was a good haul at the Brattle. Pretty sure that The Politics of Aristotle, is a keeper. Pretty sure that's going to end up in this room. And then we have The Shipwreck of Their Hopes. This will not be a keeper. I will read it and I will definitely enjoy it. But I doubt that I'll keep it unless I'm building a library of military assessments of the American Civil War, and I think it's a little late for that. I don't think I'll be doing that. Then we have George Washington's expense account in an ex-library edition. I will take a little time to clean that up. We have The Praise Singer by Mary Renault. We'll just go right on the shelf there. We have The Riverside Chaucer. Definitely a keeper. Definitely. And with a lot of delighted and very guilty rereading going on. Across the Wide Missouri by Bernard DeVoto. We have A Certain Idea of France, the find of the day, the version of Julian Jackson's biography of Charles de Gaulle that I wanted. Fantastic. I'll try to remember to leave a link to my review of the book. Then Theft of Swords, the first of the Uria revelations. Wizard's First Rule by Terry Goodkin. Love to hear from any of you if you read this book and know it. And finally, 2 novels by Walker Percy that either will or will not revamp my assessment of that author. I don't know quite how that alchemy works. I know that you feel it too. Sometimes an author just doesn't do it for you. No matter what the critical acclaim, no matter how, even sometimes no matter how closely they're writing to what should work for you, still sometimes it doesn't. I don't know about you, but I always distrust that. And gradually, glacially, I do get around to questioning it in almost every case, unless I'm dead certain. And that's the thing. When it comes to Walker Percy, I've had this inner debate many times over the decades, over the whole of his publishing career. I've had this inner debate many times. And every time I have gone at each book with avid, clear attention. So I don't know what I'm doubting now. I don't know what I'm doubting now. But I'll give it a try. I found these 2 paperbacks for $1 a piece. You can't do much better than that. So I'll give it a try and see. Neither one is his celebrated debut. That's good. I wouldn't really have wanted to do that. Although, if I'd found The Moviegoer in that format with those dorky cover illustrations, I would have taken it. No, these 2 are good. These 2 are, they're good. They're at the height of his powers, so to speak. They're in the middle of his career, so to speak. So I'll give them a try. But anyway, that's the joy of the Brattle anyway, is that for spending very little money, you can indulge in all kinds of stuff, all kinds of whims. First-time authors that you've never heard of before. You can occasionally, if you're very lucky, find something like this. I am still so thrilled that I found this. I might even just wholesale reread it. Why not? I mean, it's been years since I read it. I read it very closely. I wrote what I think was a very good review of it. But it's surely time. And really, I don't find books at the Brattle in order to commemorate their editions. I find books at the Brattle in order to read them. So anyway, that was my trip to the Brattle. We will now batten down the hatches for rain. I think we'll be getting some spring rain. 70 degrees tomorrow, 70 degrees the next day, and then spring rain, which will be pretty. I don't think it'll be a little bit of a nightmare because the bean. You see her, the bean there? She's right behind me there. She doesn't like the rain at all, even gentle spring rain. But I'll wrap this up for now. That was a fun visit. I'm glad I made the time to do it. And maybe a couple of keepers. That Riverside Chaucer, that de Gaulle paperback, definitely. And probably the Jowett Aristotle as well. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.